everybody, what's going on? This is Bruce with habowskistudio. Today we're going to be playing in the studio, working with some watercolor and Casein, so let's get to it. Okay, recently I purchased some Casein paints, being inspired by some YouTube videos that I've seen, especially James Gurney. And I thought it might be interesting to get some experience before the warm weather comes here in Maine and try it out on site. But for right now, we're going to have some play dates in the studio mixed in with my normal oil painting videos. And I just think it's kind of fun to play around. In this particular piece, I'm going to be using an older painting as just a little guide to replicate into a new painting using watercolor and Casein and see how it goes. So thanks for joining me. And if you're new watching for the first time, hey, thanks for clicking on my video. And if you like what you see in this video, I invite you to check out the others that I've done and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to hit the bell notification. It'll let you know when I post new videos. So let's go to the easel and see what we're up to. Okay, today's little demonstration is going to be on an 8x8 pad of watercolor paper, and I'll put a link to the products that I'm using for this little experiment. But you can see my older painting up here. I've just pulled out a few of the buildings, kind of just got a simple composition going. And what I've done is I've taken this 1-inch brush and a little synthetic, and I wet all the paper, did a little yellow ochre wash, and then drew out the scene in pencil, just a quick little sketch, and then overlaid some darker purple tones, as you can see, to start the process of building up some form that we're then going to kind of bring to fruition with the Casein and start doing a little more rendering. I still want to try to maintain, I like the idea of the watercolor washes, and I started out with watercolor years ago, so I'm a little familiar with it, and I don't want to obliterate everything of the base sketch. So we're going to play around, try to find a balance, and I think it's going to be kind of fun. So let's get on to the painting part. Now this particular paper has quite a bit of texture to it. It's a handmade paper. See if I can zoom in here so you can see the little bit of detail. And it adds a nice little textural element because of the subject matter. So that's going to assist me in getting the different layers having some texture, I believe. So we'll see how it goes. I'm going to lay out my Casein paint, and we'll get to working on some applying some more opaque layers of color. I gotta say, this piece really took me back to the past. It was really interesting kind of getting into the watercolor washes. And I didn't go into that too much and show you that step because I don't want to get too confused with the video here. It's mostly about trying out more of the Casein painting. But anyone that's worked a little bit in watercolor, it's basically just wetting the paper, dropping in color so it fuses out. And then as it starts to set up, kind of blocking in more chunky tones as you saw in the sides of the barn. One thing that was interesting was on the close-up and playback here was looking at the granular effect of the paint. I thought that added a nice textural element without having to paint it right off the bat. So that was very interesting. And just getting in some base tones for the sky, as I mentioned, using a yellow ochre base. It's kind of a warmy yellowy tone, and the purple I thought would be a nice kind of obviously complementary contrast. And so what I'm doing now, of course, is I'm using getting in the negative shapes, painting around, pulling out some of the tree trunks. And you'll see over the process of painting I go through that quite a bit. I'm still, again, learning the density of the paint as I need it for opaqueness to achieve certain effects. And of course it dries matte and everything kind of sinks in quite a bit. So really later on you'll see the difficulty in achieving some rich darks. I hopefully with the new book that I purchased on Casein painting, it'll give me some insight as to how to handle that. But in the meantime, like I mentioned too in the beginning, copying an old painting is kind of a nice way to just
get to the painting part for this particular exercise. I was not too concerned necessarily with exact proportions of architectural elements or perspective, even though it looks pretty decent. It was more about really just honing in on textural effects using the paper to achieve certain desired results and seeing what the paper can do. And I plan on carrying this particular pad, and I have the Pentalic pad that James Gurney recommended, a little more smoother paper so that I have some choices on site, because I could see if I'm in the woods doing some tree trunks or sort of a scene like that, this type of paper I'm using now will be very conducive to achieving a great result. Something else I kept playing with too was just trying to scumble the paint on to see what kind of effects, knowing of course the roughness of the paper and seeing how much I can get away with, because you can always come in and fill that in more opaquely, but it sort of ties into my oil painting technique of paying attention when I'm applying base layers to really kind of see how much information I need to suggest something. If we put too much in too soon, then you're trying to get back to that sort of scumbled surface. It's very difficult, if not impossible. So something to think about.
Hey, I just want to take a second here and thank one of my subscribers on YouTube for donating to my channel to help support what I produce for you guys. I thought that was very generous of him, and I really appreciate it. If you would like to do the same thing, feel free. Any little bit helps to, it does take a little time to produce these for you guys, but it's so much fun, and I get a lot of comments that people are really getting a lot out of them, so appreciate that. And if you do so, thanks in advance. I'll put a link to PayPal down below, and I tried Patreon before, and honestly, I just didn't like the customer service. So if any of you out there were participating in that program a while ago, I apologize for dropping that, but customer service is important to me, so I figured this was a way to just kind of keep it more basic and to the point and real. That's what my channel's about. I don't try to sugarcoat anything or try to be very transparent. So that's all I have to say. Let's get back to the video.
Thanks for that moment there. Also, I want to say that for anybody watching my videos, I kind of do my thing and present it to you in this video format. But feel free to drop me some comments or message or however you want to do it, and let me know what you'd like to see me paint. Maybe there's something that I never thought of that I'd be really into. I don't know. Also, maybe a challenge like, hey, I've never seen you paint people, or whatever. It'd be interesting to see maybe how I handle that as a little challenge and see what I come up with. So let me know. Anyway, back to the painting again, starting with all these kind of values, and I'm finding that this is becoming, I think I have a dark tone on there as you see here, but sometimes as the paint sets up and dries, it can sink in a little bit, and I know this medium dries to a dull matte finish, and I think there's just some elements you may not ever, of course, be able to achieve in the richness of color. So it has its own unique qualities that are that make it each medium interesting. That whoever works in, if you work in watercolor, pastel, and so on. So the biggest challenge I think in the future will be really getting some deep darks. I think I did okay in the end when this was all done, but I kept having to repeat movements, so to speak, and keep going over areas. And of course, if you're painting outdoors, you really want to try to nail something right away. But it is a process, and you do have to build other layers. But I'm definitely loving the textural and how the paper is really playing into this. And it's hard for me because I tend to be, if you've seen my videos or know about my artwork, especially with my urban pieces, I can be pretty put together in terms of the finish on the painting. So it's a little outside my comfort zone, but I think it's going to feed into my oil paintings, and reaching out and trying different mediums is always very important. One of my next goals is to eventually try etching. I just think I just love etchings. I think they're so awesome, and I think my drawing style would lend itself well to that. Now with the trees here, it was more about just trying to, lay in how am I going to use my brushwork to achieve a tree look. And I knew, obviously, that trying to replicate a certain tree, oak tree, what have you, was not the point of this experimentation mode right here. So I wasn't too concerned with replicating the look of a certain type of tree, just the idea of applying texture to a tree to achieve the look of it. Doing a little rim lighting, the hay bales and in the snow, and of course I always love to put those lights against darks. It really pops things, and really kind of a fun challenge. And the values in the snow I'm trying to keep relatively close because obviously it's not a bright sunny day, and just trying to get some interest there for color and texture and that sort of idea. Now, one thing I'm already anticipating going forward when I start to try to take this outside is this paint is going to dry fast. I mean, man. And I know there's, of course, some stay wet palettes, familiar with acrylic painters and some gouache painters and so on. I do have a little spritz bottle that I obviously believe will come in handy in those occasions, but this is going to be nice, kind of sort of getting pretty familiar with the medium before I take it outdoors and really, it's almost like exercising before the Olympics, I guess. I don't know. You test out your skills, and then when the event happens, you're prepared, is what I'm hoping. Here I'm just putting in some base tones of how you get snow on a roof, and then some of the color of the roof pops through. And here I am starting to cut that in. And depending on your reference photos, you want to, if you're following something in the studio, you're painting from reference photo. Even if you're painting from life, if elements in the painting look too similar and the shapes are too similar, it's your job as an artist to, hey, I need to make this interesting and make it engaging to look at. And maybe, sometimes we get caught up in a technique we're doing and we overdo it. So if I was to do that with what I'm putting in here for the dark shingle color, and I didn't like it and I want to put more white back in, that'd be very difficult to, I might possibly get lucky if I'm super quick after applying it, taking a little damp paper towel, rubbing it out to minimize the stain effect, and then putting the more opaque white snow over it. But then sometimes you're probably just better starting over. It might be a good idea for studio practice to see what your limits are for corrections in this medium. I have no idea, but I could see that. It seems plausible that you could do that. You put a color down, and right away, if you didn't like an effect, especially if it's a darker tone, try to buff it out, so to speak, with a little damp paper towel to minimize its value. So when you put a light tone over it, you might get lucky. I'm not sure of the long-term effects of Casein for like some oil paints. Obviously, with light tones, will become transparent with time. Not sure with Casein. Now, something else I've also, during this past winter, I've been playing around with a little bit, is using some gouache also. I remember using that years ago and really not knowing what I'm doing, or technique-wise not very good as a painter and applying paint. I kind of just dropped it and then turned to oils, but now looking coming back to it and playing around with it because I had some floating around the studio. That's been really fun too, and I could maybe see, probably honestly, the first impressions here are I'll probably just stick with gouache in the field, maybe. But I'm gonna give this Casein a go and see what happens. I'm just being real here. It's a challenge to. I think the key is going to be I got to really get the right consistency of water to the paint to give that initial flow, so I can get 2 or 3 strokes out in the field to suggest something, and then those strokes are going to be pretty darn close to the value I need and the color. The advantage of this is because it sets up fairly darn quick is that I don't see too much muddying going on unless your colors are muddy to begin with. But whereas playing around with gouache in the past, if you're not careful, of course you can disturb the underlayers. So the key is to really kind of stroke it on there and leave it. it's been an interesting journey so far. Feel like I'm going down memory lane a little bit with this piece. I mean, I also remember way back when I first came to Maine, I was playing around with pastel too, and I loved pastel. I loved the idea of drawing and being able to multiply that with your color. It was very, very interesting. The main reason I dropped that was the fragility of the medium. I mean, now I know, of course, about the spacers and mats and such, but you can still get a little dust between your mat and glass. And then the expensive framing, because I was doing art shows and everything. I just kind of dropped it and move on to other things, but I would like to investigate that more in the future also. But oil painting will always be my first love. I'd be interested to know, for the viewers that are watching this, what past passions you've had in different mediums before you arrived at the medium you're working in now, and give some feedback in the comments to maybe other people out there. There's comments you'll make that will inspire them to try a different medium they never thought of. And like for instance, one thing I personally would just not get into it. Too many things going on right now with other interests, but encaustic painting, really, I've seen some encaustic paintings that are amazing, and I like that idea of the wax and the color and the look of the finished pieces. I mean, there's so much art that I like, and sometimes it can be somewhat, in a funny way, annoying, because me trying to focus on one thing at a time for a period of time can be a little challenging artistically. I'm always kind of, oh, look at that, oh, look at that, and we got to pick our battles. I accept that wholeheartedly. That's just the way my creative mind works, and I feel you're best at doing creative things when your mind is the most charged up for that aspect at the time. I don't know how to explain it any further. When I start to get maybe bored with a painting, I'll work on another painting. I don't keep working on something when my mind is not engaged. The mind needs to be engaged to make it a good work, and that you're making critical decisions and artistic decisions and all that sort of thing. Sometimes it can be confusing. I mean, so many creative things to choose from, but another aspect with my oil paintings that I'm working on formulating is some still life painting. I've been recently at our local antiques place buying some animal bones, and I've thought about this for years, and then I had this opportunity with this antique shop, and I'm so excited to be looking into ideas using those bones to tell stories through still life painting. I'm not one to just paint something in a still life. I sometimes do that, but it's really a chance to build a narrative and a story, so I'm looking forward to that. Might take a couple years to produce, might not. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, thanks for letting me kind of go on and on a little bit, but back to the painting. I'm just working on trying to get a little bit of rim lighting, a little bit of edge lighting there where the snow collects in the sills of the windows. Gives a nice visual effect against the dark. Now I'm just trying out these the pointed round from a travel set by Richardson that was recommended by Gurney. The brushes he uses in his videos. Kind of like it, just learning how much paint, water I need to get into the paint for flow. Then I can always cut around shape with the painting, the negative shape. So it's interesting. Kind of the handles to me are a touch short, but they're that way for a reason because they're travel brushes. Overall, I do like the brushes. I think they handle pretty well, so I'm pretty happy with that aspect of them. And here I am just kind of continuing on, putting some strokes in and seeing how much I can use them and utilize them. I did like the texture down below where you see where I'm working right now with the snow and the edge of the shingle on the roof there. Pretty happy with how that came out. Again, just getting back into overlaying some tones that just trying to get this saturated dark just seemed to be very tricky, and I still got a lot to learn about that, so I'll work on that. Now this was the fun part, taking this chiseled brush and really working in there with the opaque sky color to cut negative shape to create positive shapes. Very cool. I find I actually do enjoy using some synthetic flats quite a bit to chisel out areas and to create some interesting tiles of color, so to speak. So something I highly recommend practicing with, no matter the medium. You can. I use a lot of Tuscan flats in my oil painting that I really enjoy, synthetics, and yeah, you can see how I just pop in little dabs of color just to create those branches, and again, wasn't trying to create any specific tree, just the idea of the technique. And that's important sometimes when you're starting an experimental project in the studio, is to chew off one problem at a time, work on that, and then continue to build the idea of putting all that together in a work of art. Okay, we're going to be tying this up in just a couple seconds here, but hope you enjoyed the video. And again, thank you for allowing me a moment to talk about the donation by a YouTube viewer of mine. And again, I invite you, if you're so inclined, help me out with the channel and produce other ideas, and let me know what you'd like to see. I appreciate you taking the time watching this video today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you've worked in Casein and what tips and tricks you may have up your sleeve in the comments. Take care.
Well, I'm going to call this painting done. Pretty happy with how it came out. Still have tons to learn using Casein. Seems I'm having a real problem getting some deep saturated darks. I did purchase a book through from a person I follow on Facebook on Casein painting. Haven't had a chance to read it yet, but when I do, I'll let you know some little tidbits and give you a link to the book if you're interested in trying out Casein. I liked using it over the watercolor base. It's kind of a cool kind of vibe going on, and of course it would have probably a completely different look on the surface of the paper. This paper was pretty rough, and so that can facilitate certain textural elements that you may want to achieve in your work. I think in the end I'll prefer a smoother paper to start, but this is why I'm practicing and trying out these little studio experiments, and that's the whole point of doing art in general, and seeing how it might feed into my oil painting. Techniques I might use to apply color in more of a tile format, because paint sets up so quick that you have a little trouble brushing it out quickly. So I can see that being a problem when you're, of course, outdoors in the summer. We'll see. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments what you think. And again, if you were new watching my channel for the first time, thanks a lot. Appreciate you joining me. And if you liked it, again, I invite you to subscribe. So, see everybody later.